Welcome back to the deep dive. Often our dives take us into, well, complex systems, financial models, or historical currents. Today, though, we're taking a necessary detour. We're going deep into the architecture of the human heart. This deep dive is intensely personal. It's built on source material that feels almost sacred in its vulnerability. We're exploring the difficult, the really necessary work of self-recognition, the heavy cost of resilience, and the persistent internal architecture of sorrow. A sorrow that refuses to fully retreat even long after survival has been achieved.
And our source material is, as you said, profoundly intimate. It's a collection of private documents titled Letters to Myself, Courage, Healing, and Quiet Sadness. It is absolutely crucial to understand that these documents were never intended for public view. They are private meditations, really private. They serve as a kind of uncensored account of the emotional weight carried in silence. They chart a journey from years of overwhelming trauma to the eventual hard-won declaration of self-acceptance. They offer a rare window, really, into what it truly means to survive a quiet hell.
So our mission today is to move slowly, thoughtfully, through the emotional terrain detailed in these letters. We'll unpack the initial struggle, analyze the psychological breakthrough that redefined strength for the writer, and ultimately grapple with a courageous acknowledgement of the lasting, quiet sadness that she carries forward. It's a profound exploration, really, of choosing life for oneself even when that life feels, well, heavier than expected. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the foundation the writer builds, a simple statement of identity that anchors the entire experience. The writer begins with a very unambiguous statement. It grounds her in reality and relationship. She writes, and I'll read this exactly, I am Vanina Vergara, CV Vergara, to the English-speaking world, born in Asunción, Paraguay. I have 3 children whom I love deeply, and this is my life.
That right there, that's a masterclass in establishing identity, and its simplicity is incredibly powerful, just stark. She immediately anchors her existence in 2 critical areas: her origin, Asunción, Paraguay, and her primary relationship, her 3 children. The phrase, I love deeply, acts almost like a protective shield, doesn't it? A non-negotiable fact. But then there's that final clause, and this is my life.
Yeah, it sounds deceptively straightforward, almost matter of fact. But given the intensity of the letters that follow, it carries the weight of everything that is this life, doesn't it? It's the conflict right there.
Precisely. It sets up the immediate juxtaposition. You have the outward, unqualified love, the duty, the visible achievement of maintaining a family, and then the internal reality of intense, undocumented personal suffering. And for you listening, this contrast probably resonates because so many people who carry heavy burdens maintain that public facade, love and duty on the outside, while managing an entire isolated world of pain inside. The "this is my life" statement acknowledges the whole truth, the good, the bad, all at once.
And what about the format itself? She's writing letters to herself. You mentioned this allows for radical honesty. If the goal is self-recognition, why a formal letter to your own inner self? Why is that maybe more effective than just, say, writing a diary entry?
That's a crucial question, I think, about the mechanics of healing here. A diary often documents thoughts and feelings as they happen, kind of a stream of consciousness sometimes. A letter to oneself performs a function. It deliberately assigns roles. When Vanina writes to you, she separates the suffering self from the observing self, the self experiencing the pain and the self watching it. She becomes both the wounded subject and, vitally, the compassionate, authoritative witness who was previously absent in her life.
Okay. So she's essentially creating the safety net internally that she never had externally.
Exactly that. And when you write a letter, there's often an inherent sense of respect, maybe formality, definitely importance. It bypasses the need for external validation or judgment. And those are often the very things that silence victims of trauma in the first place, right? Trauma often thrives when the experience is invalidated by others or just ignored. By addressing the letter to her own soul, she validates the experience herself. She forces her internal world to recognize its own worth and its own wounds without fear of critique. It's really a foundational act of psychological self-rescue.
It creates a kind of necessary distance, maybe, enough distance to deliver these powerful self-affirming truths that come next. Let's move into the first of those truths, in the first letter. It immediately tackles the nature of her survival.
Right.
The first letter starts with this immediate command, breathe, just breathe. And then it establishes the core theme. Her survival isn't random. It is, and this is her phrase, a miracle built of courage, not of luck.
And that distinction is monumental, absolutely monumental. If you attribute survival just to luck, you're passively minimizing the tremendous agency, the effort required to navigate immense difficulty. You remain sort of a victim of chance. By calling it courage, she reclaims the entire narrative. She insists that she made active, difficult choices to persist, often when the easier route, frankly, would have been emotional or even physical surrender. This moves the experience from something that happened to her to something she actively drove through.
And the language describing the trauma immediately explains why that courage was so necessary. It was immense suffering, but crucially, it was isolated suffering. She writes, she passed through hells that no one witnessed. That phrase, no one witnessed.
Yes, hells that no one witnessed. That defines the isolation as part of the injury itself. It's not just the event, it's the witnessing or lack thereof. Trauma, when it's documented and witnessed, can sometimes be integrated into a community narrative of survival. There's a shared understanding. But unwitnessed trauma leaves the victim suspended in this kind of disbelief. There's no social proof that the hell was real, which can lead to profound self-doubt, internal distortion. She experienced the horror, as she says, of being drowned in silence and lost within violence. This silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the active, oppressive condition under which she was forced to endure.
That idea, drowned in silence, it suggests the lack of recognition was almost as dangerous as the violence itself, like a second injury. But she emphasizes that this endurance, this courage, it came at a cost to the self. She says she unmade herself to hold a family together that left her empty.
Oh, that line. It just defines the core sacrifice, doesn't it? It speaks directly to the role of the primary caregiver, often caught in abusive or unsupported systems, who treats the self as, well, an expendable commodity. You burn down your own being, your identity, your desires, your energy, your mental health, just to maintain a habitable structure for dependence. And you are left, as she says, empty. The self is entirely consumed in the service of duty and survival for others. This is such a common, though rarely articulated, cost of long-term selfless devotion.
So, if the self was consumed, how does she start to reclaim it? The letter pivots pretty quickly here to redefine her experience. It replaces that internalized punishment with genuine self-compassion. This feels like the moment she starts rebuilding her worth.
It really is. It's the therapeutic intervention she gives herself. She addresses the central lie that prolonged hardship implants in the self, this idea that struggle equates to failure or some kind of moral deficiency. She challenges that internal judge directly by offering two crucial, really radical distinctions.
The first one feels so widely applicable. It's, you are not a weak woman. You're an exhausted woman.
Think about the power in that difference. Weakness implies a character flaw, right? A moral failure, something fundamentally wrong with who you are. But exhaustion is a functional state. It's the natural, inevitable, and logical result of continuous, overwhelming effort without replenishment, without support. By redefining the struggle as exhaustion, she immediately shifts the blame. It moves from her character to the impossible circumstances and the sheer physical and mental toll. It transforms her state from a perceived moral failure into a testament to her relentless effort.
And the second distinction focuses specifically on her mothering, which must carry so much guilt. She writes, you were not a bad mother. You were a mother without guidance, without a safety net, without an arm saying, go on, I will hold you.
This is absolutely critical because guilt so often fixates on performance, doesn't it? Did I do a good enough job? She recontextualizes her performance entirely. She didn't fail at the job of motherhood. She failed, or felt she failed, at the impossible task of doing that job while basically suspended in midair, completely alone. That phrase, without a safety net, that's the key insight. She was performing arguably the most complex, high-stakes role of her life without any institutional, familial, or emotional guarantee of protection or support. Once she acknowledges that lack of external support, the guilt associated with the struggle starts to dissolve. It's replaced by compassion for the sheer difficulty of the task she faced.
Right. And despite all this, the exhaustion, the isolation, the external forces trying to define her by contempt or guilt or abandonment, she survived. They did not kill her, as she puts it. The letter speaks of an internal fire that contempt couldn't extinguish. She was so exhausted and so alone. What is the nature of this profound internal fire, this thing that refused to die?
I think that fire represents the deepest core of the essential self. It's like the soul's innate refusal to accept its own obliteration. It differs profoundly from a simple survival instinct, I believe. Survival instinct is often driven by external threats, fight or flight. This fire feels more like an internal, self-directed drive toward authenticity, toward being fully who she is, regardless of external reward or punishment. She notes this choice was not for fashion, not for rebellion. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was internal.
So it's a commitment to one's own existence, recognizing it as a fundamental good in itself.
Exactly. It's the last stand of self-preservation, maybe. When her body and her eyes were ready to surrender, when the physical self was just depleted, she says, "Something within you said, I will not give up." That something is the deep, maybe spiritual commitment to finding herself again. Knowing that the journey back is internal, it's solitary, and it's non-negotiable. This is the moment she chooses to live, not just out of duty, but for her soul.
It's the ultimate act of self-love, really. And the letter closes with that incredibly powerful promise of self-commitment. I hold you tight. I promise I will never let you go again, for I choose you every single day. The declaration feels absolute. Final.
It is. It's the Declaration of Independence. It marks the shift from being primarily a resource for others to becoming the primary beneficiary of her own strength. However, and this is where we transition, because a declaration of war against the past doesn't mean the past just vanishes overnight. The second letter reveals that while this commitment stops the active self-destruction, the active self-neglect, it doesn't instantly relieve the immense weight accumulated during those years of sacrifice. Courage is required not only to choose life, but also to choose to carry the remnants of the past life forward. And this brings us right to the core melancholic atmosphere we wanted to explore today. The second letter is just deeply, deeply reflective. It introduces the complex reality that despite the profound self-acceptance detailed in that first letter, there is, in her words, a sadness that never quite left.
And crucially, she defines the type of sorrow this is. It's not acute dramatic grief that demands immediate attention or intervention. It's a chronic condition. She contrasts days of feeling well with days where she simply functions. That distinction right there between feeling fully alive and merely operating on autopilot, it speaks volumes about the level of emotional depletion, doesn't it?
It really does. The difference between feeling well and merely functioning is precisely the space occupied by that chronic sorrow. It's the emotional tax levied by her history. And she describes how this feeling operates now. It learned, she says, to sit very still, and perhaps most poignantly, it does not make a fuss. It ruins nothing.
That detail is just devastating. It means the sadness is so well-behaved, so domesticated, that it poses no visible threat to her daily routines or her commitments, like to her family. It's functional sorrow.
Functional sorrow, that's a great way to put it, and it's often the hardest to treat because it doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It doesn't demand attention. It has integrated itself into the high-functioning, resilient life she has built. It's invisible from the outside completely, but it's a constant presence on the inside. It has become a fundamental internal rhythm, which she captures so perfectly with the central metaphor of the letter, the quiet drumbeat of sadness.
The drumbeat, she describes it beating slowly, like a low drum, marking the rhythm of what I do not say. What's the psychological significance there, do you think? Using a rhythm rather than, say, an image like a weight or a shadow.
Well, a rhythm, especially a low, slow drumbeat, it signifies something foundational, something pervasive. It's not an occasional noise. It suggests the underlying tempo of life itself. A drumbeat dictates the pace, doesn't it? So if the sadness is the drumbeat, it implies that everything she does, every smile, every routine, every moment of work or care, is paced by this constant, low reminder of her unarticulated history. It becomes the steady measure of the silence she was previously drowned in, but now internalized. It represents all the fear, the exhaustion, the hurt that, when it couldn't be expressed aloud, became this steady, heavy pulse within.
She then gives this sadness a history, almost a lineage, tracing it back to external demands and conditions. It was born in places where one could not cry aloud. It grew amongst mandates, silences, and duties. What kind of mandates are we likely talking about here?
These are often those unspoken, societal, or deeply ingrained familial mandates. Rules that prohibit emotional vulnerability, particularly for people in caretaker roles, often women. The mandate is usually, be strong, don't burden others. Your feelings are secondary to your responsibilities. These are silent, oppressive laws that demand the suppression of genuine emotion. And when emotion is consistently suppressed like that, it doesn't just disappear, it calcifies. It hardens into this chronic internal sorrow. It fed, she notes specifically, on the days when she could not fall. Because if I fell, who would lift the others?
And that is the ultimate devastating consequence of being the sole pillar of support, isn't it? You forfeit the right to be fully human, you forfeit the right to error, to vulnerability, and critically, you forfeit the right to collapse when you need to.
And that forfeited vulnerability, it seems, curdles into this quiet drumbeat. If your entire identity is built on being the one person who never breaks, the internal world has absolutely nowhere to safely process the damage being done. So she learned the necessary coping mechanism, the disguise. She mentions it. Smiles, with routines, with "I'm fine." We all know that one. But these disguises, they only work when external observers are present, when there's an audience.
Help me understand the mechanism of its return then, she says. When the house falls silent, when no one is watching me, it returns. Why is silence its trigger? Why then?
Well, silence in this context represents the absence of external demand. It's the permission to stop performing the role. When the house falls silent, when the audience leaves, the protective shell of routine and duty cracks, or maybe just softens, and the internal rhythm, that drum beat, takes over. It becomes audible again internally. And it's fascinating how she describes this embrace when it returns. And it holds me tight, as if I'm the only thing it recognizes.
Wow, that sounds like a terrible kind of comfort. It suggests that this sorrow, this heavy constant, is paradoxically the most reliable, maybe the most honest thing in her life after everything else.
It speaks directly to the familiarity of suffering for someone who's been through intense, prolonged trauma. In a life possibly defined by instability, betrayal, abandonment, the sadness itself has been the one reliable constant. It's always been there. It recognizes her truth because it is part of her truth, the distilled essence of her sacrifice and survival, and this paradoxical comfort makes it incredibly difficult to truly let go of, even when self-acceptance has been achieved. It becomes a kind of painful internal homecoming. It's what she knows.
And this leads to, I think, the most important technical distinction she makes about the effect of this chronic state. She shifts the description away from the language of active trauma breaking, wounding, into the language of chronic fatigue or weight. She states very clearly, it does not break me, but it weighs on me. And it does not wound me, but it numbs me. What's the significance of that shift in language?
If we look at this clinically, or just experientially, it's the difference between an acute crisis and chronic endurance. Acute trauma breaks and wounds. The system is in active chaos. It demands immediate attention, healing, repair. But when the system has survived, when the immediate crisis is past, the residual effect is often this chronic emotional load. The sadness weighs because it's the accumulated density of years of emotional labor, of holding everything together, and it numbs because the mind has likely had to dull its capacity for deep feeling, both deep pain and deep joy, simply to survive carrying that prolonged weight without shattering.
So she's describing a state where maybe true lightness, true spontaneity, deep emotional connection are inhibited, not by a new injury, but by the sheer constant density of the past that she carries. It sounds like trying to run through water.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. It's an enduring fatigue that limits her capacity for full emotional vibrancy, even on the well days. The courage of the first letter was the active choice not to be broken. The profound insight of the second letter is the acceptance that she still carries the memory and the weight of having been nearly broken. It's the difference, maybe, between defeating a monster and learning to live day by day in the ruins it left behind.
And this acknowledgement, this honest assessment of the ruins, sets the stage for the final, really existential confrontation within the second letter.
Yes, the acknowledgement of the quiet drumbeat, this persistent emotional weight, this numbness, it naturally leads to that pivotal moment of self-confrontation. After detailing this reality, this functional sorrow, the writer asks the inevitable question, the question of self-worth and the quality of life achieved. And I ask myself, is this living?
That question. It feels like the quiet cry of every soul that's been defined primarily by duty and sacrifice for too long. If survival means carrying this permanent weight, this numbness, then what is the quality of the life that has actually been achieved? Is it enough?
And she immediately diagnoses the root cause of this feeling, linking it directly back to her past role, her past sacrifices. She asks, is this what remains when one gives so much to others that one forgets oneself? This raises such a critical, universal question for us, for anyone listening. What exactly is the non-material, persistent price paid for complete, sustained self-neglect in the service of others? The letter strongly suggests the price is this residual, quiet sorrow that becomes the emotional baseline. It becomes the constant internal landscape.
But it's important, isn't it, that she doesn't demand an immediate cure? She clarifies the purpose of this articulation of writing this letter. She writes, I seek no answers today. I only needed to say it.
Exactly. The goal here is therapeutic acknowledgement, not immediate erasure or fixing. She needs to put words to this smallness of sorrow, as she calls it, specifically so that it does not rot inside. Unexpressed, isolated, unnamed sorrow tends to fester, doesn't it? It contaminates and poisons the rest of one's emotional life from the inside out. By articulating the sorrow, by giving the drumbeat a name, a rhythm, a history, she externalizes it just enough. She brings it into the light of her own consciousness, reducing its power to operate unconsciously in the dark.
So the goal is a kind of radical transparency with the inner world, a radical act of emotional honesty with herself. She isn't trying to throw the sorrow away, maybe because she knows she can't, but she's trying to manage it by acknowledging its legitimate existence, its history.
That's the key distinction, I think. She's not fighting the shadow anymore, not trying to pretend it isn't there. She's recognizing it as a constant feature of her internal landscape. And this recognition culminates in the final commitment of the letter, a commitment which beautifully integrates the painful realization of the second letter with the powerful self-promise of the first letter.
The conclusion of the second letter is such a powerful moment of acceptance and forward movement. She needs the sadness to know two things, she says. So it knows I hear it, that I accept it, just that acknowledgement, and then the new direction, the commitment to self. And that, little by little, I am trying to live for myself as well.
That phrase, little by little, is perhaps the most realistic and profound aspect of her ongoing recovery. It's so honest. She's not promising an overnight transformation. She's not promising a sudden rush of self-indulgence or carefree living. She understands that resilience, real resilience, is an ongoing process. It takes time. It means accepting the history, accepting the sadness, the drumbeat, while committing to the slow, incremental daily work of self-prioritization. It is the steady, quiet commitment to ensure that the self, which was once treated as an expendable commodity, is now the primary project, little by little.
Which means that true courage, as defined across these two letters, isn't just about overcoming the external hells, the violence, the silence. It's also about creating space for the self to heal and exist, even if that means carrying the quiet drumbeat of sorrow indefinitely. The two letters together feel like a comprehensive guide. First, you declare your worth, your right to exist for yourself. Second, you honestly inventory the weight that surviving actually entails.
And this whole journey provides such a vital insight for you, the listener. Survival is always ongoing work. It's not a finish line you cross. The strength required to live for oneself, especially after deep trauma or sacrifice, often has to coexist with the heavy remnants of those past experiences. She is choosing self-direction while acknowledging fully the cost. Hashtag outro, final reflections.
So this deep dive into Vanina Vergara's letters, it feels like a powerful testament to radical self-compassion and radical honesty. It illustrates that courage means accepting the weight left behind by trauma, that quiet drumbeat, without allowing that weight to completely halt or define your future. It's an affirmation of the slow, quiet power of personal reclamation, finding yourself again, even with the scars.
Absolutely. And that quiet drumbeat serves as such a critical philosophical marker, I think. The path to healing is rarely about erasing history. You can't, usually. History leaves scars, and those scars often hum with a low, constant frequency. Healing is achieved, perhaps, when you integrate that history, when you choose to live a new, self-directed life, even while you acknowledge the exact cost of having survived the past one. It's about turning the rhythm of silence, the rhythm of sorry, into a recognized internal tempo that you can learn to live with and even live beyond. We can close, maybe, on the reflective note Vanina leaves us with herself. Vani, with her heart wrapped in silence, but writing nonetheless. Think about that image for a moment. The silence is still there, wrapping the heart, but the act of articulation of writing is now coexisting with it. It's breaking through. So we ask you to reflect just for a moment on your own internal landscape. What unspoken rhythm might you be carrying? What quiet drumbeat is waiting for you to simply hear it, to acknowledge it, perhaps accept it, and begin the quiet, slow work of articulating it into your own self-directed life?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.